Hi everyone, my name is Maryse Bourgault. I'm with the University of Saskatchewan. As Ken mentioned, I was at Montana State for 3 years before I came to Saskatchewan. So my experience with cover crops, is a little bit in the States where cover crops are really used as a fallow replacement because they're still doing a lot more fallow than we are. And so the NRCS tends to encourage farmers to have cover crops instead of getting fallow. So we had an experiment at the Montana State University Northern Ag Research Center in Havre, Montana, where we had cover crops in rotations with wheat. So we had 4 cycles of that. I had people argue with me, a cover crop wheat is not a rotation because you only have 2 crops, so it's not a real rotation. But as Ken said, with research, we can't do everything under the sun all at once because then it becomes a little bit complicated to try and interpret what's working and what isn't. So moved to Saskatoon in March 2020. It took a little while for me to get started because, as you know, I think it was the 11th of March or something like that. We were told, no, the global pandemic, you all go home. And then, I was itching to do some field work, but that didn't work for that first summer. But anyway, so we do have a couple of cover crop experiments in Saskatoon. One is in collaboration with Yvonne Lawley and Linda Gorham, so at the University of Manitoba and the University of Alberta. We have 4 experiments that are exactly the same across these 3 sites. So that leads to very interesting questions because what we're finding, just after 1 year of data and conversations about the kind of measurements that we want to take, etc., is that the cover crops are behaving differently between these three sites. So we're finding that there's a lot of interest right now in cover crops, but the advice that we find for people needs to be locally relevant and local. Local is more than the prairies. The prairies are not uniform things, as we all know. But we're seeing some of those programs that tend to oversimplify maybe a little bit. So just a show of hands, how many of you guys are interested in cover crops? Or, thinking about, okay, all right. So we're kind of looking at more than half half or more than half. When we went, I want to say 4 years ago, when we went on the road show in the Highline in Montana, we're showing results with cover crops. Darren Boss, our superintendent at the research station, asked that same question. How many hands did you think we had? 0, exactly. So cookies for Ken. Nothing. We had 5 different presentations in 5 different sites. Every time people were like, okay, well, you're a cow guy, so we're not going to fight you, but we're not that interested in what you have to say. So we'll sit here and listen, but no one was interested. And that's, even with, the U.S. actually providing some financial incentives for people to try things like that. So things have changed quite fast. As Ken said, we're not that nimble as researchers, and I think Farming Smarters is even better than we are with the university because we have students that need to have a thesis at the end of things. So, and statistics and everything. So what we're finding is that there's 2 challenges that we have with cover crops, and I think that might resonate with some people. Is that one, they're hard to establish. And 2, then we have problems with weeds. And these are sort of related as well, because if you're having trouble establishing your cover crops, then they're not competing against the weeds that you might have. And then you're trying to encourage those cover crops to do something, to grow, then you don't necessarily want to put some herbicides that are going to kill them, right? So how many of you guys are using cover crops at all? Yeah, couple. Are you using them as a full season, end of season? End of season, yeah. Or pre-season. So how do you do the pre-season?
I grow peas for processing. So depending on the schedule of seeding or harvest, I have a bigger window either after harvest or before seeding. So
you'd seed them like early April?
No, well, it depends where I am in the schedule.
Right.
usually it's mid-May, sometimes it's middle of June. So if it's the middle of June scheduling, then I can put a cover in before seeding.
Right.
Or if I'm earlier seeded and harvested earlier, then I can put a later season cover crop in afterwards.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. So we see a lot of, or actually, I've been working with Linda and Yvonne, and Yvonne has been doing quite a bit of work, and especially, you know, that shoulder season right after harvest, where you wanna, you still, you know, you harvest and you go straight back in with the planter, seed some cover crops so that you have that cover, and hopefully you still have some of that residue in the spring, so that helps you with some of that erosion as well. We're finding, and that's part of the treatments that we have in that new experiments, that we're finding that in some places you just don't have that time and space. So if you're trying to, and we're dry land, so it's a little bit different from what you see behind me, is that we're dry land, so, and often our fall is pretty dry. So you might want to, you know, we do, you know, we were pretty good last year, you know, we harvested that, you know, the same afternoon we went in and planted, and then 4 or 5 weeks later, we're going to see, you know, and trying to get a biomass sample out of it, and there's next to nothing there, right? So depending on what your season actually looks like, then, you know, sometimes that's if you don't have plants there, you don't have a cover crop. So you don't have any of the benefits that are supposed to come with those cover crops. So with that new experiment, we're trying to establish them a little bit earlier in the season, and so. We're pushing it so that, you know, maybe we can broadcasting when the crop is already up. So we're looking at, you know, right before flowering. So we're trying to broadcast some seeds into the canola and the wheat that are there, and then, but we're also pushing it in intercropping configurations, so that, you know, we might have alternate rows of your crop, your cover crops. We also tried a broadcast at seeding as well. So right before we seed, we go and we spread the seeds. We had some of our technicians that came back this year before we started with our second year, basically said, why are we doing this? Like, there's no crops. Like, we're just not, you know, like, why are we wasting seeds, you know, trying to broadcast this? And we kind of went like, well, it's easier to broadcast than, you know, doing an intercrop. So we decided to keep it anyway. I know in Saskatoon, we had a very timely rain right after we seeded. So the broadcast this year is doing really, really well. I was, you know, last year you would have asked me and I would have said, no, don't broadcast anything. It's useless. You're just, you know, putting seeds on top. They're gonna dry. If they germinate a little bit, they're gonna dry right out because it's too hot. And it was hot as well, but at least, you know, we had that good rain. So if you're able to time it, if you have a year where, you know, maybe that works, then maybe that's an option for people. The other thing I want to say is that we're looking at different species as well. So we're looking at individual species, or, well, we're looking at clover mixtures, some of them annual, some of them biennial, so more permanent covers. We also look at alfalfa as well in Italian ryegrass. So we have, you know, the annual clovers in the Italian ryegrass that we know are going to die over the winter, but we also have some of those clovers in the alfalfa that we know will survive that winter and come back the next year. So we're thinking maybe we need to establish some of those cover crops in the first year to get the benefits in the second year. With the alfalfa this year, it's looking really good. and you know, our crop, I'm looking at our crop and I'm like, yeah, it's getting a bit shaded. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. So we'll see what that does. We're also looking at different herbicides. So with canola, we have the Liberty Link, we have the Clearfield, and we have the Roundup Ready. And what we're trying to do is see, can you use these packages with cover crops? Or like if you're going to use glyphosate, and, you know, that's probably one that we kind of know will supposed to kill everything. So if it does kill it, then, you know, that probably doesn't work that much. But we're also hoping that maybe if the cover crop is established well enough, and that's been a challenge, so I don't have an answer for you guys, unfortunately, because we just didn't have enough of the cover crops there, you know, for us to be able to see how much died really. So that's unfortunate. But so if we do get that good cover crop, like maybe some of that herbicide can just knock it off just a little bit, so that you can still have a good competition from your cash crop and reduce that competition a little bit without actually killing it, so that you can still have some of those benefits of having that cover later on. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, so Jeremiah here is focusing on that year 2 as well. So seeing, what are some of the trade-offs and benefits that we have. We focused a little bit more on having, clovers and alfalfa because of their ability to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and hopefully have, some of that nitrogen in the system. Like from the air. We also, Italian ryegrass actually looked pretty good last year. So if you're looking for cover, our Italian ryegrass was the one that was the best for that. We looked at Phacelia, so we had Phacelia in the wheat. Phacelia is an annual as well, but it went, and it actually didn't look like much at the beginning of the season, but once it's flowering, it gets to a fair size. Bright purple flowers. My Twitter account kind of went wild with that picture because everyone was like, "Oh, that's beautiful." So I don't know if it was really the kind of engagement we wanted, but that's okay. We doubled our followers, but that doesn't mean much because we didn't have that many to start with. But and I had the WGRF board members come and visit, and they're kind of looking at it and they're like, how are you going to kill the Phacelia? And I'm like, I'm not killing it. I'm not, this is not part of their protocol. And they're kind of looking at me like, oh, are you sure? And so of course, we didn't want to, because by the time the wheat was ready to harvest, and even if we wanted to desiccate it, the Phacelia had gone to seed, it had flowered, it had made all of its seeds, so it was basically dead by the time we were ready to harvest the wheat. So really, in that sense, it wasn't too much of a problem. But we do see that there are Phacelia seeds around these plots as well. And so part of the problem now is that, do we want to keep the Phacelia or do we want to kill the weeds that are there? And so that's the challenge that we have, because we do have kochia. Some of it is a little bit thick, so we don't necessarily want to let that field be problematic for the next 4 years. So that's something that we want to look at some point. But it requires a little bit more thinking that we had expected at the beginning of that project.
I was just going to ask if you tried broadcasting after the herbicide application.
Broadcasting after the herbicide.
That way you can kind of control your weeds and potentially get something.
No, because they're separate experiments. So that's a little bit the problem that we have, is because we have the herbicide experiments separate from the timing experiments. So with the herbicides, all we have is we have all of the different cover crops together. And then the idea is, with the herbicide applications, what survives and what doesn't. But we haven't done that, no. And for the different timings and the different species, like those experiments, we don't tend to put any herbicides in, because we were also looking at how much weed pressure and how much of some of these cover crops might actually reduce weed pressures in those. So we don't want to necessarily kill everything. And your options are a bit more limited when you have a mix of 4 different cover crop species. What we're finding really is, based on the Montana experience as well, like in Montana, it was a little bit easier, because if you're looking at a fallow replacement, and because the Havre station, we also have cattle in it, so we had different termination methods. Some of it was just a chemical termination where we glyphosate everything, but we also had grazing and a hay treatments where we'd hay it and we remove it, but we also had some cows in the middle, and that was always both nerve-wracking and exciting at the same time. Nerve-wracking because we have variety trials all around it and other other experiments, so you really don't want the cows to go anywhere else. But you have a lot more options if you're using cover crops as part of forage, or if you're going to graze it, or if you're going to hay it, because at that time, if you do get some weeds in it, it's not so dramatic. You can still get legumes. You could get all sorts of different things. One lesson that we found is that the NRCS was really pushing for a mix of, a big diversity of crops. So a lot of, cool season, but also warm season crops. We were terminating everything early July because we wanted to protect that moisture, any rain that would fall for the next crop. And even then, we did find that in about 3 years out of 8, we would find a little bit of a detriment to the next cash crop. So we'd find some yield decreases there. But if you're able to use that as forage, then you can compensate some of those economics from losing a little bit of yield. And that's not 3 years out of 8 is a little bit less than half, right? So in most of your years, and it basically said it doesn't make a difference, because it's the winter snowfall that you get that really determines how much yield you have in whatever happens in that season as well. So if you have cows on farm, then it gives you a lot more options to do all of these things. So, and I think that's I might send the mic back to some of the farming smarter people. But if you have corn and you want cover crops in it, and you're grazing your corn or you're using it for forage, then you have more options there as well. Questions? What am I missing, Jeremiah? Yes.
A lot of the producers are, looking at cover crops because they want to improve soil health, which is a term I'm not really sure exactly what it means. So, what are we seeing in terms of soil changes by cover crops?
Yeah, so soil health indicators, and so as you mentioned, soil health tends to mean different things to different people. So it gets a little bit difficult. I'm really interested in improving soil organic matter, but that's the kind of thing that takes maybe 10, 15, 20 years before we actually get like a good measurement of a change in soil organic matter. So it takes a while, and how much of this is going to how much of the short-term indicators will actually lead to long-term desirable changes, that's really much up in the air. So it's really difficult. I tend to focus on things, and partly because we have graduate students as well. So we tend to focus on things that are a little bit more immediate. So for example, Jeremiah is looking at the nitrogen in the nitrate that you have in the soil. So with the decompositions of those clovers, do we actually see a little bit more nitrogen in that soil? So it's not soil health as a whole, but it's some indicators that maybe some of this is happening. But like there's just so little scientific studies that have been published on cover crops in Western Canada that these are all questions that we all have, and we don't really have good answers for it. But and biomass is a big part of that too, right? So if we can actually find a way of getting good biomass in our cover crop without hurting yields of the cash crop too much, then that would be a good idea. Yes.
Is there any work being done with getting local information and saying these species work in this area best as a cover crop? Is there any kind of collaboration information?
I think everyone that works in so the question is how much collaboration is there with cover crops, and I think everyone that's passionate about cover crops, we kind of know each other, and we kind of work together like more organically kind of thing. With the project with the Farmers for Climate Solutions. I'm also part of the Sask Soil Board. So Sask Soil is the new name for the Saskatchewan Soil Conservation Association. So they're the ones to look at those cover crops in that. So we kind of I don't, yeah, there's nothing official that say, okay, this is, you know, a new initiative for cover crops, but I think there's a lot of interest, and there's a lot of us kind of going like, okay, we need to figure this out. I know when we you know, were thinking about this project, and you know, I look to Yvonne Lawley quite a bit, because she's the one that's been in Canada working on that and trying to get funding for, you know, forever. And then all of a sudden, you know, there's a lot of funding for it, but there wasn't before that. So part of what Yvonne's been doing as well with one of her graduate students, and part of the pandemic, was doing a survey of what people do. So what farmers do, what has worked and what hasn't worked for them. So that's, I think that's a good starting point for people, is to see what are people already doing. And as Ken mentioned, you know, farmers are a lot more nimble than we are, because if I see something that doesn't work, it's a little bit more complicated for me to go to the funders and say, we want to try something completely different with this. Usually that doesn't really work, and if you have a graduate student, you can't really say, okay, well, you've worked a year on this, you still have a year to go, but we're going to do something completely different, and you're going to be here for another year, right? I mean, like, that's not fair to students. But I want to say stay in touch with, you know, Farming Smarters. I know I need to be more proactive in my Twitter account as well, but and you know, there's we've been asked to talk a lot about these subjects as well. So as we learn things, hopefully we're able to share it with you guys.
But on the forage industry side of things, there's been considerable work done on species selection, and
Yes.
when it comes to using it or utilizing it as a grazing or, you know, alternative for pasture. Considerable. Kevin Elmy is another person who's got lots of work looking at different species.
Yeah, no, for sure. As forages, and to me, like, that's where I'm a scientist, right? So I get really picky on things. So and I never know, you know, if you're using a poly mixture and you're going to either hay it or graze it, is it really a cover crop or is it a forage? So, you know, and you know, cover crops, you know, when they were popular and there's money in it, like, everyone kind of calls something a cover crop because, well, it's a cover. Well, yeah, every plant is a cover. Every crop should be a cover at some point as well. So I don't know.
You know, the definition of cover being has no extra utility other than the environmental services.
Yeah, exactly. And but honestly, we you know, even in Montana, we didn't really adhere to that definition. So. Yes, I think so.
Well,
Do you want people to have a look at some of the species that are growing in your
sure, why not?
corn?
We got a little bit of time, I think. What's growing?